Hi, this is Dr. John Grazel, and this synoptic video is about gender and development. Now, gender and development is purposely being used instead of the more classic women in development. But gender and development actually comes out of that. Uh, Not very long ago, and even into today, to an amazing extent, the role of women was ignored in development. They were just seen as part of people, and you would actually get the amazing phenomena of actually seeing people doing research or doing implementation, say, for instance, in agriculture on a field, working with a man when it was clear that the women were actually doing most of the work. Uh, that eventually became evident enough that you did begin to get significant studies about women's roles in development, and those focused on the many roles that women play. They're obviously wives, they're obviously mothers, but they're also farmers, they're also educators of their children, they're entrepreneurs. So they have many roles that are not adequately understood by people who are focused on one particular area of engagement. And then you began to get good studies on the effects of women of activities. I mean, how did some activities actually affect the income or the status of the behavior? Did it raise their income? Did it raise their status? Or in some cases, did it actually take away from them and give to others activities that, for instance, were sources of income for them? Now, out of that, at least, did come recognition that you had to begin to ask specifically about women. What are they doing? What are their roles? What's happening? And that did also result in an age of development of special programs for women, income programs, such as in microcredit, health programs directed to their health, girls' education, agricultural projects that focused on what women tended to do, like gardening or tree nurseries, and even training institutions that actually help train women specifically to increase their capacities and their roles. Now, all that has been very good. But when we look at where we are today, I'd like to raise several issues. First of all, those activities very often were successful, but also had some problems. They take women out of the context precisely because women have so many roles. If you suddenly give her a business, that doesn't necessarily reduce her role as mother, as teacher, as the person who has to get water to the house. Sometimes it actually could increase the amount of effort they have. There often was lack of follow-up in terms of seeing the long-term consequences on women and how it actually affected them over the long term. And whether there was sustainability of those activities when this outside support went away. There's no question, though, that things are better now than they were before. As part of general understanding now, there seems to be widespread attention that we have to pay attention, particularly, for instance, to universal education and particularly girls' education. That we have to look at the reality of human rights and equal rights for women. On a theoretical and ideological basis, is becoming fairly universal, though there are blocks that actually find this as threatening. At the same time, the problems aren't changing, and in some cases, it's becoming more dramatic. We have incredible problems of human trafficking. It's not only women, but women are particularly susceptible to that. Rape as an aspect of conflict is absolutely beyond description almost in places such as the Congo in Africa. Labor exploitation of women as migrant workers and also workers within their own countries in terms of conditions and pay. The degree to which single mothers are more and more becoming the breadwinners and having responsibility for the economics as well as all other aspects of family life. What does that mean? Well, what it means, first of all, in terms of dealing with women, particularly in development, we've got to get a little more specific. We've got to place them in their larger context, and we have to begin addressing their problems more systematically and with more sophistication. And to give just one example, in education, it was discovered that when you gave girls education up to the 6th grade, it actually resulted in certain places, in this case Karnataka, with a decrease in economic activity because they began to remove themselves from traditional roles, but they didn't have the skills to take on new roles. If you gave them education to the ninth grade, they were able to then enter a new modern workforce. A very important policy finding that very much went against some very simplistic thinking about just gives up to sixth grade education. But now there are two other factors that I really want to deal with. The first is we talk about women, but we have to make sure that when we talk about women, we also realize there's a class factor here. We're not talking about elite women. You know, if you look at countries like India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they've had female leadership before the United States of America. Elite women in many of these countries are put in a different class, directly as elite women and then sometimes a surrogate for elite families and elite men. And development assistance has, in many cases, helped a lot of those elite women or helped women who aren't elite become elite. And not necessarily the problem with that, except that doesn't help necessarily the majority of women. So focusing on elite women doesn't necessarily help most non-elite women. The second issue, which is really critical, is it's not necessarily about sex, it's about gender. And when we say gender, we're talking about the roles and behaviors and expectations that are ascribed to people along with sex. What is the image, the expectation of males and females within the society? And this is really very critical because many of the problems we face are actually problems of gender roles. And this is what is expected. Are men expected to be fighters and military people and women homekeepers? Or can men also be homekeepers? And our women are supposed to be fighters. And these are not only roles that have to do with developing countries. These are roles that we face globally, even within our own United States. How does gender roles influence not only what we do, but what we see and what we choose to emphasize? And actually, how does it create major problems that we have to deal with? So we're very interested in girls' education, but for instance, the bottom 10%, the failures tend to be boys. And boys, when they fail because of the reality of gender roles, tend to go into things like militias and crime and illegal activity as their only outlets to find gainful employment. So looking at gender carefully and realizing that we may have to deal with gender roles and reestablishing our understanding of gender roles. And this is actually a global issue, not necessarily a particular society issue, though you do have to put it in its social context, may be the real challenge that faces us without losing an understanding that we still have to particularly focus in many cases on women's roles in development because in fact, in reality, women still in many cases represent a vastly disadvantaged, disenfranchised group of people. And here's a last issue. In fact, we all carry baggage about understanding gender roles that interfere with our very research and understanding of what is possible in terms of gender roles. So we probably carry baggage that tends to say, I can tell you, women tend to be more cooperative. And there's good reason supporting that, but if you do studies of high school girls and in cliques, sometimes competition, not cooperation, seems to be the dominating value. And the opposite is we tend to think of men as competitive, and we forget the things like the saying ascribed to the Duke of Wellington that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton, in which he tried to say that it was actually the ability of the British to cooperate and work together as a team that made the difference, not the competition. So even as we approach this problem, I think we have to say to ourselves, we have to dialogue with others and clarify our own stereotypes, our own thoughts, and actually move beyond that and think about what are the foundational principles we would like to apply to a reconfiguration of gender in the 21st century on a global level, as well as in our own societies, to achieve the goals we aspire to.